What's going on, folks? Welcome back to the Finding Purpose podcast. I just wanted to thank everybody for listening, for their engagement, for their reviews, and just showing me love this first month of 2025. Super grateful for the guests that I've had on. We were lucky to be able to record in Boca with my friend Larry Dix. That was last week's episode. I really hope you had a chance to listen to it because he provided a lot of great feedback when it comes to all the entrepreneurs and the journey. And I know I'm connected with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm sure somebody is launching a business and is having those insecurities and those jitters. And it's a great resource for them to hear someone who's gone through everything and was able to build a huge business in Apex Trust for over the past 40 years. Today, I'm so lucky to be able to have my friend Vinny Brusco. And it's funny, I met Vinny a while ago through Sean and Dave.
Yep.
And Sean and Dave with both who I've had on the podcast, A Sanctuary. Vinny and I had been going back and forth, I believe, over the past 3 months.
Yeah, probably about that.
Just having trouble, connecting.
That's how these things go sometimes.
And I felt that I was being rude, and then
you thought you were being rude?
Yeah,
I felt like I was being rude.
Yeah, I did.
So I'm glad. Isn't it amazing how you were great. I feel like we always internalize these things.
Yeah, we definitely were overthinking it.
Yeah,
we're just busy guys. And, Vinny is especially, he's got his Agora Social Club that's based in Larchmont, Westchester County. And that's probably how we met because, that's the big Westchester County group, A Sanctuary, and at the Sale House with Terrytown. So he's got his social club, and he also has his men's group called the Council of Dudes. He's also launched his own podcast.
Yep.
The Council of Dudes podcast, which I do encourage you all to listen after you listen to this episode. And I really just want to jump into it, Vinny, because I think there's a lot of things that we have in common when it comes to our approaches on life and the mindsets that we try to, maintain as we navigate this world. So
how difficult. Thank you very much. What a lovely introduction. I appreciate it. You said the word maintain, and how hard is it just to maintain the mindset?
It's crazy. It's because there's so many things that get thrown your way throughout the day.
Yeah.
Where it's testing it. And it's like, sometimes when I find myself feeling that it's being tested, it's like that bend, don't break mentality, where it's like, okay, I could let it bend a little bit. And sometimes I'll maybe send like a, sharply worded email or whatnot. But at the end of the day, the mission is to really just, be who I am and in everything that I do,
Yeah.
So I want to kind of jump into like your background, man, because there's not much I know about you when it comes to like your early days, and really I'm just gonna have an opportunity to get to know you.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So many different avenues. I'm big into health and wellness, psychology, philosophy, big into radio. That was kind of where I started the podcasting journey back in the radio days, doing overnights, also doing morning traffic and radio and stuff. So I've always had a passion for communication and just never really knew how to allocate that communication accordingly. And during COVID, I got my life coaching certification, which again kind of lends itself well to the psychology and the philosophy aspect of things. And before I went and I was like, I'm going to go get my master's and become a therapist. I was like, let me try and see how I feel about this. And always kind of knowing that I enjoyed it, but this was a different kind of knowing and understanding. There's like the knowing that you'd fill out the bubble correctly in the test, but then there's the internalization of the knowing, right? Mm-hmm. Which is totally different. And I fell in love with just the whole process of it, learning about the different types of therapy. And so I got my life coaching certification. And over the course of time, I've just been speaking to people and just having conversations that are not that water cooler conversation, that are deeply rooted, and just connecting with people and, finding like-minded individuals and just going on the journey.
Dude, I love that. I really want to jump into communication because it's something that I've been having an issue with when it comes to managing my team. And, I'll be honest, like I wish they communicated the same way that I do, but I also understand that that's not practical for everyone to communicate the way that I do. What's your approach to communication when it comes to managing a team, and how do you help guide folks to be more open to just like communicating in a way where it's clear and concise and productive?
Great question. So I think communication starts with culture. the culture of who you are and the culture you create around your team, and how do you communicate with them, right? Do you keep it in a way that's clear and concise, or are you communicating? So I think also asking them how they're internalizing your communication, right? Because having two small children, I know how difficult it can be to communicate to people. And they may hear one thing, you're saying one thing, and there's just kind of some frequency that's not aligning correctly. So I think first asking, are you understanding? And then really being attentive and really having that active listening, like good posture, eye contact, really being empathetic in what they're saying and communicating, and then reverberating back to them like, hey, am I understanding this correctly? And just communicating that way. Whether it be a team or parenting skills, these are all things that I've kind of implemented. Or even on like in one-on-one coaching sessions with people, like just being really present with people. Because at the end of the day, again, whether it be a team, a client, your children, everybody wants to be seen and heard, right? Everyone, it's How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? One of the best books I've ever read. And everybody just wants that feeling of being seen. And ultimately, if you reverse that, that boils down to unconditionally loved.
It's so true, man. Because like one of the things for me is making sure that everyone on my team is heard and seen exactly how you just said. And sometimes I also understand where it's a sharp contrast from how they're used to being communicated previously.
Yeah.
And kind of getting to the root of that is what I'm doing. But, like everything else in life, I think consistency is what really matters when it comes to incorporating communication with a team,
Absolutely.
and I try to stay consistent with all of my messaging and whatnot. Do you think that communication hurdles can be solved with just like adjusting the way that you communicate? Is that how you should do it? Or should you just like sit them down and be like, listen, like, I feel like I'm not getting through to you. Like, what can I do to communicate better?
It's both.
Yeah.
I think it's fine tuning your message to their understanding, but then also realizing that again, they might not be understanding the message you're giving them. So asking, and this goes for partnership too, right? Within a relationship, it's so important to be able to sit and so often, it's, do you need to be seen? Do you need to be heard? What do you need from me right now in order to communicate better? And I think it's just having that open dialogue, and then also like checking your ego is such a huge part of it, whether it be in a relationship, a marriage, a childhood, whatever it is, your team. It's realizing like we're all in this together. We're all trying to just figure this shit out.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. So I think being able to communicate that initially and just say, listen, I'm here with you. I just want this to run as efficiently as possible. And how can we do that in a clear, concise manner?
Where has your perspective of communication come from? Has it evolved from a young age? Like, was communication pretty streamlined within your family nucleus growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I always had open doorways to both my parents. They were always there for me if I need to go to them for anything. That was always, very evident. But I think over time, you go through like these different parts of your life, these different phases where you internalize a lot and you don't communicate well. And especially as guys, we have this ego that we know everything and you can't hear things, like you're not hearing it. And jokingly, my mom used to be like, these are called conversations. Like, This is what it's about. And if you can't sit and be present in a conversation, like you're doomed. Like you have to be able to not take everything so personal. So I think it's having a very open household at a young age, but then also, going through school and a lot of reading and studying and podcasts and just immersing myself in that type of culture and personal development, health and wellness is like, and having coaching clients and realizing that like to be there presently with them is a gift. It's a blessing.
Yeah. And it's funny because like one of the things that I often refer to is like how communication was with the relationships who are the closest to me and how it's evolved throughout. And a lot of it was me really dropping the ball and not saying everything that I needed to say. I wouldn't say lie, but as much as withhold parts of the truth. And, like I always tell people, you're only as sick as your secrets are. And when that's how you communicated in the past life, like then, at the end of the day, that's what the people around you are used to, where they're always going to, assume that there is something more to know or I'm holding back on something. And now it's like, the contrast in that communication is now it's like I communicate like very thoroughly with the people who I love, and it's caused such a weird dynamic in those relationships because they're still trained to assume that I'm not telling them the whole truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when I'm like, when you go from that like holding back habit to just straight open direct communication, and it's almost a culture shock because now you're actually saying what's on your mind.
For sure.
And they're like, all right. And sometimes I can even come out as too much for them. And that's something that I've adjusted to with, I don't know if you, I mean, I feel like you followed my journey enough to
Sure.
like to know like the transformation where it's like, yeah, like I was in a culture of withholding truth for a while to feed my urges in both like in alcoholism and everything that comes with.
Sure.
And now it's, you know, I've turned that page and have been living under different philosophies where it's like, all right, one of the key components of that is saying what you mean and meaning what you say.
Yeah.
You know, and I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Well, anytime you make any type of change, you're always the pariah. That's always seems to be the case. And whether that be with a diet, or, you know, just the way you approach life. I mean, there was a line of demarcation in my mind when I realized I'm able to respond versus react. Right.
Yep.
And then all my relationships around that did start to change because people were used to seeing me in this way where I would react. And I didn't have control over myself. But once I was able to kind of realize, oh, I have a choice in this. Like, I don't have to just come out of the gate firing. I could just kind of move accordingly. So anytime that you make any change, people definitely, there's an adjustment period because they're so used to you being in this certain way, having this certain tone, this way about you. But once you start to shift and mold and grow, really, it does take an adjustment period for sure.
Totally. And I love what you said about reading and reacting. And I think a huge part of that reading and reacting is acknowledging that it's okay to just pause and think.
Absolutely.
And absorb and observe. And when you do that, then more than likely you're going to make a well-informed decision where it's going to benefit everyone around you and you're not attaching yourself to an outcome. But at the end of the day, you can have peace in that decision. I have a question for you though. You know, like you're so immersed in this personal development space. When did that start?
It's funny because my parents recently moved and I was going through some old stuff and I realized how much I've always been a part of it. It's always been a part of who I am. Like seeing old journals, old books on psychology, philosophy, Plato, and so it's always been there. I think that, you know, on the journey, we enter a certain point and then we go into the labyrinth and then we come out on the other side and we back are to who we were, right? The alchemist, right? You're back to where you started. So it's always been kind of underlying somewhere. I think I lost it probably in like high school-ish, but always dabbled, college, same thing. But I would say about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I started just meditating. I was kind of at that point of life. I was like, I just work, like doing well, right? Had the apartment, 2 bedrooms, wife, 1 kid, 2 beautiful trucks, right? Like checked all the boxes that culture says you should check. And I remember looking out my window. I was like, is this it? Like, this is all I do. I just work and make money. And like, that's it. And it's felt like so like hollow. So I started meditating. I started doing sensory deprivation, got very big into that. And, I started really just sitting with myself and being more comfortable being with myself and being alone. And I remember, you know, early on the sensory deprivation, the thought came to me is I'm afraid of what I'm going to think. And in that moment, I said, well, that's scarier than anything I'll ever think in that tank. Because those thoughts are happening. Whether I want to interface with them or not, they're happening somewhere in my mind. So it's up to you. So in that moment, I booked my first float session and it really taught me how to like compartmentalize my brain and look at things from a more analytical perspective.
Talk about that float session.
Yeah. So the first one or just floating in general?
Floating in general.
Yeah. So floating in sensory deprivation is going into 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt. It's complete dark. You're going to basically a large tub and you're fully buoyant. It's denser than the Dead Sea and you can't see, you can't hear because you basically frame your face in the water. So your ears are underneath. And you can't feel anything because the water is actually temperature just about a degree or 2 below your body temperature because you upregulate. And essentially you go into a deep form of meditation. You go into very low brainwave states. And Man, I've had some really profound experiences in the float tank, some that I couldn't even put words to, but it is a very quick, deep form of meditation that has been super impactful.
That's wild.
Yeah,
And,
I love it.
you know, leading into that float session, obviously the theme of my podcast is finding purpose. It sounds like you were in a place where it's like, hey, like I need a higher purpose.
Yeah, I think purpose changes. You know, a lot of people outsource their purpose to people, whether your kids, your wife, and I think those could all be very purposeful tasks and approaches to life. But the purpose stems from just the internal navigation towards something bigger than yourself, and that could be anything, right? It could be a podcast, it could be coaching, it could be a mentorship. But it's stepping outside of yourself and going on a journey towards something that maybe you can't even put words to. You know, so much of it is hard to describe sometimes.
I mean, I totally agree with you where, you know, I think a lot of, I know I can speak for myself where there was this period of time when I was just like looking to find purpose in either material objects or external relationships or employment or monetary purpose. And yeah, dude, inner purpose is really where, regardless of what you have around you, if it's aligning with who you are, your mission, the spiritual nature of everything, frankly. And that's when I was able to really find purpose. And I found a lot of purpose in having conversations with people like you, where it, you know, at the end of the day, it's taking that ounce of humility and really just like looking inside. And that's really where I was able to do the deepest work on myself, where it was like, all right, like what's my role in all of this? The things that I'm thinking are not the way they should be. Why am I thinking that they shouldn't be that way? You know, because at the end of the day, that's how they are. You know, why can't I get to a place of acceptance for those things? You know, and a lot of it was very much ego driven.
Yeah.
These resounding faith in myself that I could like impose my will on something and it can be all of a sudden correct. And that obsession of needing to be correct, you know? And I think that's, you know, something that a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah. It's funny. We think we have some form of control, right? We think that we have, like, we could actually take control of things. And the reality is that we really can't control anything. Like that's the real truth of it. But that's a really hard concept of letting go, right? It's hard. It's hard to let go of things that you perceivingly care about or love or hold on to. And that could be a job, that could be whatever it is. And I think we have a very, you know, we have this Google Street View, right? We're like, you know, operating life through this like first person Call of Duty, you know, framework. But when you start to kind of pull out and you go to the Google Earth view, right? And you get the perspective of God, right? You realize that things do flow, things do yin and yang. There is this energetic frequency to the ethereal that moves, and you don't always have to have an answer for that. You will never have an answer for that. It's just the way it is. So you could either have resistance towards that and try to control everything, which is so hard to not, or you can, to the best of your ability, try to tap into that frequency and that flow and allow things to just be as they are. And it's easier said than done.
So much.
But things do start to reveal themselves in this very serendipitous, harmonious way. And once you start to tap that and touch that, it's like, oh, right. And that's where like the magic of life comes back in. And I think that we have that as kids. I think that having two small children, my daughter's now 10 and my son's 5. I see that. I see his awe and wonder and magic and how he sees the world. And I see my daughter who's 10, who's now starting to have the air taken out of her balloon, right? Now she's in the comparison narrative. Now she's in the who does this and who got what grade and how well she's at this. So it's part of the journey inevitably. So the lack of control, realizing that we have no control, it kind of all starts with that, you know, realization.
You just mentioned the comparison narrative, and I'd love for you to dive a little deeper into that, because I think that's something that's super toxic in society right now.
Yeah.
But the fact that it happens at such a young age, and I don't think it happened for me at that age because we weren't exposed to nearly as much. We didn't have access to phones, and, you know, even like television was like, let's watch a sitcom.
Yeah.
Let's watch Family Fucking Matters. You know what I mean? Like,
Amen.
You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like, okay, like I can go on YouTube and see all these different things that all these different people are doing. So talk about how the comparison narrative has taken mold in society now, where it where it was different for us.
Yeah. I don't think it was different. Well, it was different, but it still existed. I think that we still have this. I remember watching like whatever, a TV show and thinking like idolizing that version of their life. Right. And one of my favorite quotes is "Comparison is a thief of joy" by Teddy Roosevelt.
Yep.
And it's so true. And, you know, my daughter's not on social media. She doesn't have a phone, but she's still able to have kids around her that are, you know, whether it be a jiu-jitsu or acting or any of the hobbies that she does, where she still sees other people performing at a different level, maybe higher, maybe lower, but she still has this internal dialogue within herself where there is this comparison mindset. So it's so hard to not be on social media as an adult, a 41-year-old man, to not look at my phone and be like, oh, this guy's doing that thing. This guy's on this vacation. This family's doing that thing. I'm a failure. I'm less than. But it goes back to that control aspect of it where, you know, everyone's journey is different. It's so individualized. Our experiences, everything that brought us to where you are. So yeah, comparison can get very toxic very quickly. And it's something I definitely struggle with. And anytime I get into that loop of comparison, I think it's so important to stop what you're doing and just find some gratitude, because gratitude will nullify comparison very quickly.
Yep.
You know, perspective and realizing how blessed you are in any way, shape, or form, you know, whether it be just waking up or having the ability to use your limbs, whatever it is, having gratitude for things immediately is a great way to kind of shake out of that comparison mindset.
Yeah, man, dude, I love that. And it's funny because what I was thinking was like when I was growing up, it was, the world was smaller where, I was comparing myself to my peers in high school. It's like, oh, they drive this car and I got my dad's, you know, pre-owned 89 Toyota Camry, you know, like,
91 Camry.
There you go, bro. It's the first starter car.
Yeah, for sure.
But like, you know what I'm saying? Like I was comparing myself to that. And now it's like, you know, kids can go in there and they can compare themselves to someone on the other side of the world, who's like whatever, doing whatever. And like the world has gotten so much bigger. But I love what you said about gratitude, because, you know, I alluded to that moment of pause. And for me, like those moments of pauses when I get overwhelmed are a moment for gratitude. Yeah. Because it does. Oh, sorry. Oh, Jesus Christ. It does put everything into perspective for me where, you know, I do find myself, comparing, whether it's at the gym, whether it's, you know, in a parking lot, wherever, you know, I do find myself getting into those moments sometimes. And since we're doing quotes, one of my favorite quotes of Ice Cube is like, life is like a gym. To the left, you got someone, who, I forgot what he says.
Paraphrase it.
He's basically like saying, to the left, you got someone who to the left, you have someone who you want to be, and to the right, you have someone who would die to be in the position that you're in.
Sure.
And, you know, like, and that's something that like is so powerful where it's such a metaphor, because I'm beginning to see it when I get folks like you and folks like others reach out and be like, hey, like, I want to connect with you. Yeah. You know, and I think that's nothing short. That's the highest compliment any of us can give each other. Absolutely. It's just like reaching out and being like, hey, like, I want to collaborate with you. I love what you're doing. I see that you are trying to help others. Yep. And that's also where a lot of my gratitude is rooted in, because now I have the ability to help others, man, you know, and there's such a long period of time in my life where I was in that culture of taking. What can you do for me? Relationships were transactional. And now I'm in this place where it's like, I want to make sure that I'm reaching as many people and they're hearing the things that they need to hear. Yeah. You know, because more often than not, there was a lot of different points in my life where, what if I had heard this earlier? Yeah. What if this person had crossed my path 5 years ago? Yeah. You know, and now maybe I can be that for some listener who stumbled upon my podcast and this episode, and they're hearing you speak on the work that you do. I really want to talk about the community that you build, though. Yeah. Because I think community is kind of the huge thing that we're both trying to build. Sure. And what has community meant to you? How did it contribute to you coming up? And how important is it for you to build a community for others?
Community is huge. And especially as men, we see we idolize the James Bonds or the Bruce Waynes or the Jason Bournes, where it's these lone wolf mentality. And it's cool, right? Like it's debonair, right? And there is something to that for sure. But finding like-minded people, finding community, it's huge. I mean, having people to point out your blind spots, to pat you on the back when you're doing well, to call you out on your bullshit. It's you can't replace that. You know, you can't replace getting a room of guys together and having conversations like these and realizing all the things, all the places you're struggling and all the places you're doing well and giving yourself that credit. And so much of the journey of that was a buddy of mine was going through a lot every single day. We talk on the phone as I drop my daughter off at school. And he calls me one day. He's like, "Hey man, you gotta start a men's group." And I was like, "Okay, I don't know what that means. I don't know what any of that." He's like, "You gotta start a men's group." So I reached out to a few people who do some men's group work and men's work. I was like, "Hey, listen, a buddy of mine said I should start a men's group. What does that look like?" And but I could have had an ego about that. And it's like, "No, I got to figure this out on my own, right? I got to know how to do this. I can't ask another person." But I reached out to them. They gave me some tips on how to facilitate a men's group. And I reached out to a bunch of guys and said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to be putting together this men's group, just an opportunity to have conversation." And the first one, like 24 guys were like, "Hey, I'm in." And I was driving into Starbucks to get coffee. And I was like, "What am I doing?" That voice in my head was like, "You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're going to like call this off. This is a terrible idea. You cannot do this." And in that moment I stopped and I realized like what that was. I thanked it. I was like, "Thank you for showing up. I understand you're trying to, keep me safe and comfortable, but that's not going to serve me." And that was 6 years ago. And we've done, I don't know how many men's groups. We've done them in, like town halls. We've done them in, a coffee shop. We've done them in, apartment building common areas. We did them wherever on Zoom during COVID. And that's what led me to building Agora, was the fact that I knew that guys needed a place that wasn't a gym, that you weren't looking left and right, wasn't a jiu-jitsu mat, wasn't any of these things where ego takes the forefront, but needs to dissolve the ego. And that was 6 years ago with the men's group. 4 years ago, I was thinking guys need a place like that. And we opened Agora in April, and it's building a community of like-minded men. There's no TVs, there's no drinking, there's no smoking. You say men's social club and this stigma automatically comes into play where people are like, "Oh yeah, like poker night." I'm like, "Nah, we do breath work and we do men's groups and we do ruck walks and 5Ks. And we're building a community of guys that are looking to become better husbands, sons, fathers, any version of themselves."
I love that. And I think it's so important to have those type of groups. And I love that you ignored that voice of doubt.
Yeah.
And acknowledge the fact that it was your subconscious trying to keep you safe.
Yeah.
And, as you've dove into these men's groups, how has the role of because we've been talking a lot about ego and we've mentioned it so many times over this conversation. On the opposite end of ego, is humility and vulnerability.
Sure.
I want to talk a little bit about that. Have you always been willing to be vulnerable?
I've always been very empathetic. I think I've always, lead with this. I get chills. I cry a lot. I'm I'm a very emotional guy. And I think as a man, so often we think that we can't be that vulnerable crying. I'll cry right now. I mean, I'll cry with my kids in the car, listen to music all the time. And we think that we're not strong if we cry, right? It wasn't until probably I got a little bit more confident in myself. I started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu 7 years ago. And I think I really developed a sense of confidence through doing that. Realizing like it humbles you very quickly. And being humbled, being around people that they can kill you in seconds. And realizing that, there is something to that, but you could still be kind and you could still be, vulnerable and you could still share. And I think leading with that humility, leading with the vulnerability in the group setting is so important. I mean, we do a check-in when we first get there, and if we do some breath work and we do a check-in, and you have to say 3 things you're feeling, and where you're feeling them, but you can't use ads. You can't make it. I'm feeling very happy. I'm feeling really sad. I'm feeling happy. I'm feeling sad. Like you don't give it too much power. You don't give it too little power. And so much in that opening moment really sets the tone of what we're going to dive into. And I've started adding arcs to the month. This month we did Amore Fate, which is Love Your Fate. Last month at the end of the year, we did Memento Mori, which is Remember You Must Die. So having these arcs really also adds to the space of vulnerability because it gives us a framework of what we're going to be thinking about, what we're going to be talking about, and what does it actually mean to us as men?
Dude, it's funny that the way you talk about vulnerability, and obviously you're Italian,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
right, and you come from an Italian family, and was your traditional Italian like family? Listen, I have friends who are Italian, and I feel like a lot of their like their parents and their grandparents, like it's vulnerability isn't really something that they commonly talk about.
sure.
Was it like that for you?
No, no.
No.
My
Okay.
father was a very emotional guy. He's a veteran. I see him cry all the time. Again, very similar.
Okay.
My mother's very empathetic. Same thing. So the household was very much cultivated in a space where it was okay to cry. It was okay to be emotional. Can't get carried away, right? Like you still got still got shit to do. Like let's let's call it for what it is. But yeah, I was definitely in a household that allowed those feelings to be felt and experienced. And I try to do that with my kids. Again, it's a fine line because we can all get carried away, and we don't want to. You don't want to be a snowplow parent that's just like,
Yeah.
okay, everything's, we'll
Snowplow parent,
we'll
I've
get
heard
through it. We'll be fine. Because that's not life. That's not reality. But yeah, I definitely was raised in a household and create a household where you could talk about whatever you're going through and especially your emotions.
It's funny because as you sit down with these men, and just for the record, I'm not talking shit about Italian culture.
Not at all.
I love Italian culture, and I love like the love that and the family unit,
Absolutely.
and just the large families that I've been lucky enough to be a part of and invited into their homes. But so like as you go through these groups with these men, and they're talking about um, whatever they're feeling, and you dig into where they came from and their families, how does that put into perspective how much you treasure that your upbringing and the family that you came from, where they may not have come from a place where there was an open forum for them to talk about and feel, and a lot of times they were shut down.
Yeah, there's the old expression, throw your problems in a pile with everybody else, or take yours right back. So it definitely lends itself to that. But I think the empathy overrides that in some regard. And the beautiful thing about the group is, I mean, we have guys who are, in their early 20s, and we have guys that are in their 50s. We have guys who are every race and nationality. And so all the politics that we argue about on social media, all the differences that we see in the world, all that goes away. Like, it's amazing. You could have someone from a complete separate side of town helping someone else, right? Through the conversation. I remember one particular meeting that we had, the topics of dads came up, and whose dad is sickly, whose dad passed away, whose dad beat the shit out of him, and whose dad was empathetic and allowed them to cry, right? So yeah, I think that having the community aspect of it really it allows everyone to just realize that we're all going through something.
Yeah.
We're all going through something, and problems are relevant and relative, right?
Yeah.
You may have gone through this problem. I may be going through this problem, but at the essence of the problem, at the essence of the experience, it's the same thing. It's just being manifested and expressed in all these different ways. So it really does strip all the bullshit away, and we're able to kind of get to the core of things.
That's awesome. See, it's so funny because one of the things for me that spearheaded my transformational journey was getting sober and, jumping into 12-step programs. And, I almost feel what you're describing when I'm in those rooms where it's such a variety of different people. I could be sitting next to someone who has no clue where they're sleeping that night. And then I could be sitting next to someone who's worth like $7 million or
Yep.
whatever, And at the end of the day, the one thing that unites is the fact that we help one another stay sober. And it's almost that similar principle. And sometimes, when I first jumped into the personal development space, I almost felt like I was, quote unquote, cheating on my community in recovery, where I was like stealing some of the things that I learned
Sure.
in recovery, in the rooms, and through a sponsor and through anybody, who I've heard share in any of these meetings, and bringing them to the personal development space. And then I realized that, a lot of the things that we talk about in personal development for people who may not be afflicted with recovery are just good ways to live your life. At the end of the day, for me, I had to remove a substance
Right.
that was not bringing out my best self. And once I was able to remove that vice, then I was really able to do the deep work that was so necessary for me to grow.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really what it's all about. It's about personal growth. You know, as you embarked on this personal growth journey, do you ever sit down and reflect on to day one and where you are now?
Not enough.
Not enough.
Not enough. Definitely not enough. I'm one of those people that if you ask me if I'm doing enough, the answer is always no. Which is not a good thing, right? I think you have to definitely, like I said before, is reverse that to gratitude. But I also look at that as, and maybe it's a warped view, but I look at it as aspiration. Like I have things that I want to achieve, and not in a monetary sense. That is a byproduct of how I want to feel. But the things I want to achieve are a sense of fulfillment, right? And I think that's a really elusive end goal, right? It's like anything that you accomplish, whether it be marathon races, tournaments, any goal, monetary goals, whatever it is. Once you get there, that top of the mountain is very quick, right?
Yeah.
And then you're just like, all right, what's next?
What's next? And that's where you found yourself,
right?
10 years ago. And you know, that's one of the things that I struggle with the most also, where it's almost dealing with compliments and dealing with, hey, you're doing great. I almost hate when people say that to me, but I also understand that it's genuine coming from them. And I should say thank you and I appreciate it. But stopping and smelling the roses is something I struggle with because, you know, the one thing that's been ingrained on me is how toxic ego can be for me personally. Sure. And so I'm such a different person where in a past, you know, previously I would do anything to gas myself up.
Sure.
You know, and now when people are you know, giving me credit for the progress that I've made, I shrink, man, you know, where it's like, all right. And it's the same mentality as you, where it's like, I have so much more left to do.
Yeah.
You know, this is great, but there's always room for improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what keeps me going in a sense where, you know, it's the journey, not the destination. And as cheesy as it sounds,
Yeah.
Every single time I've reached a destination, you know, I can't find fulfillment in the destination.
Yeah.
You know, I have to find fulfillment in the process and continuing to get better.
Yeah. Everything is in the process. I mean, the reality is that end goal that you finally achieve it's all about the process. You learn everything in the process of it. That being said, you need to, what I offer as a challenge to you is that when someone does give you a compliment, give yourself that moment to realize you're receiving one. Because I struggle with that too. Yeah. But I've gotten significantly better at it because someone's going out of their way to actually like give you the compliment, right? And whether it be genuine or not, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Because that person's seeing what you're doing, what you're putting out there, how you're showing up. And those people who step outside themselves, who actually go the extra step to say, hey, I see what you're doing, man. It's awesome. Keep it up. That's them putting themselves out there.
Yeah.
So by you being like, oh no, you know, shrinking down, no, dude, like I'm still got a lot to go. It's almost dismissing the effort that they put forward to extend the compliment. Something I struggle with. Now when someone says something to me, I just stop for a minute. I'm like, cool, thank you. I appreciate that. I really appreciate it. Because they're seeing you in the way that essentially you want to be seen. So it is a really nice gesture just to even say thank you, right?
I mean, it really is showing love.
Yeah, for sure.
It really is showing love. And that's why they say, like, I want to show you some love.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they're also understanding where you used to be.
Sure.
You know, and that in itself, knowing that they've kind of been monitoring you, and I don't want to say monitoring you, but like, like they
following the journey.
Yeah. You know, and you meant enough for them to kind of check in with what you're doing. And that in itself is just like, hey, yeah, man, like I appreciate that you even took the time to even notice.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, because we live in this like fast moving world where, you know, people are just moving, you know? How do you, you know, in these groups, how do you help these men kind of take it one step at a time and compartmentalize? Because, you know, I think, you know, when you're going into, you know, that setting, there's so much that you want to unload.
Yeah.
So how do you do to kind of just temper expectations and be like, listen, like, let's take this one step at a time.
Well, it goes back to that communication aspect of things. So setting the tone of the meeting initially when we first go through, and then everyone gets 2 minutes to unpack whatever they just expressed with the 3 feelings that they mentioned in the beginning. I set a respectful timer. So again, the timer goes off. Doesn't mean you have to stop talking, but just be aware that your 2 minutes is up. And I set that tone out at the beginning. And also just the idea of like, hey, listen, everything we say here is confidential. Like we're all here for the same reason. So allow yourself to speak up. And, you know, some guys just kind of sit quietly and observe, and that's awesome. And, you know, that's what they need. But so often the people who aren't speaking are the ones that need to speak the most.
Absolutely.
And again, setting that tone, that expectation, then depending on the size of the group, we'll go into like an open format with the arcs now in the month. I like to also introduce that into the second half of the meeting and say, listen, if anyone wants to talk about these things, you know, or we could just kind of kick the ball around and see what comes up. And, but I think setting the expectation and laying out the framework of what the meetings entail, puts everyone kind of in their own little version of what they want to share.
Do you find that a lot of them just lack structure?
No, I don't think it's structure, because there are some really disciplined individuals who come to the meetings, business owners, entrepreneurs, guys who are like fit beyond measure. I think it goes back to what we said earlier. I think everyone wants to be seen. And I think that it's one thing to be seen by your wife or your kids, but it's another thing to be seen by like another man. It's kind of I think a lot of guys, whether the relationship with your father has been great or not great, whatever it is, I think having a real relationship we lose that, right? If you rewind time, like so much of it, there were so many different initiation processes with men and becoming a man. And now it's like you learn about sex through Playboy in the Woods, right? Like when we were growing up, right? But like back in the day, like now it's like, who knows what you're consuming? So like, where's like the initiation process? So I think a lot of it is just being seen and being welcomed by another man, in the sense of like, I got you, bro. Like, I got you, brother. Like whatever it is you're going through, I'm here with you, and we'll figure it out together, you know?
Yeah, no, it's so funny you say that, because it's like they want to be understood. And, you know, I'm going to flip that coin, because there's this quote, and it was Jay Shetty, and they asked him, they're like, what do you think is the most overrated thing that is important to other people? And he said, being understood.
Mm.
And what are your thoughts there?
I think we value that, the idea that we're going to be understood. We want to be understood. We want people, because again, there's nothing worse than like screaming into, you know, deaf ears in a sense. Right. And that could be a communication thing, like we were saying earlier. Yeah, I think people definitely overvalue being understood for sure. But if you understand yourself, if you really know the essence of who you are, where you're coming from, then the noise can like be irrelevant. You know, if you know who you are, truly know who you are, at the deepest level, then the external validation that you get from being understood, you know, is fairly irrelevant.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, because I think that a lot of people want to be understood by everyone.
Sure.
And in that quest of being understood by everyone, the people who love them the most and the people who are in their inner circle totally lose understanding for who they are, because they see them just going around trying to be accepted and understood by everyone, when they're like, hey, like, we love you. Like, we do understand you. Why aren't you acknowledging that? And, you know, for me now, I've taken that position. It's like, you know, I kind of try to keep a tight circle, and not tight in a sense where like it's impenetrable and it's not inviting, but a place where the people who matter to me the most, I'm going to make an effort to understand them, because I know they're making conscious efforts to understand me. And I found a lot of peace in really treasuring those relationships, because it also provides a blueprint for when I meet someone who shares that same energy, and I can make that effort to understand them, and I can understand there's a mutual effort from them. And that's kind of how I've been able to really connect with a lot of the folks who have both been on the podcast and who I've met at other events and in small groups where I make a genuine first effort to let them know that, like, yeah, I'd like to understand where you're coming from. You are heard. I want to listen to you. And once again, we're going back to the desire to being heard, because I think that's really how you get people to put their guard down and, share those vulnerable things where you really are able to understand them.
Yeah. Just being present. I mean, that's the key word in all of that is being present with the person that you're with. That's why when you earlier were like, oh, you like the headphones. I was like, yeah, when I do the podcast, I wear the headphones because it just vacuum seals the conversation to me. Yeah. Right. Again, being a radio nerd, it kind of just adds to that. But yeah, just being present with someone and carving out the space to be present with them. I mean, that being present is so impactful and so powerful. I mean, I see it with my kids, just carving out that time where you're not on your phone, where you're just there with them in that moment. That's like all they really want. I think that, and again, that wanting to be seen or understood or whatever framing you want to put around that stems from our childhood. It stems from, having those innate needs that, don't get addressed in some way, shape, or form, right? As a parent, I've learned that as great as a father as I am, and I will give myself that credit, I'm a great father, I'm going to fuck up my kids in some way, shape, or form. They're going to be in therapy one day. My dad didn't do this, and I'm doing my best, and we're all doing our best. And if you can be present and you can see someone, like you said, just break down that barrier and be empathetic and put yourself from their lens and see the world from behind their eyes, it kind of dissolves all that bullshit.
Yeah, I think your kids will be fine. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're making, like you said, you're a great father. So from what I understand is you're taking all of these tools that you have and you're applying it to the way that you parent. So your kids are being heard and they're also hopefully reminding them that daddy's not perfect.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. I definitely remind them of that all the time.
I think that's funny when you have kids and that's kind of in the back of your head. I don't have kids myself, but I've had plenty of parents on the show who shared that how important it is to not hand down generational trauma or generational insecurities. Maybe you could dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. It's there's a program I went through. It was called Healing the Father Wound. A buddy of mine who's a therapist out in Colorado, Mikey, he has this program. It's fantastic. And essentially you reverse engineer a lot of your life. And what I learned from that is there are decisions and there are ways that I'm showing up in this current version of myself as a 41-year-old man that are still being made from the lens of a child that didn't figure out something, that didn't get a need, that didn't get something. And those decisions are happening now. So unless I go back and reverse engineer my life and the lives of those around me, that's a really powerful thing to do is, look at those people around you and reverse engineer their existence, how they came up in the world, what their childhood was like, because that's going to explain a lot of how they're showing up now. And, it wasn't until I was able to really sit in that space and be like, oh, I'm making this decision. I'm showing up this way. I'm reacting to these triggers. I hate the word, but it's, because I hadn't figured out all this other bullshit that I never interfaced with. And that's constantly unfolding. That's a constant unfolding process. So it really does boil down to learning about yourself on a deeper, more fundamental level. And then also for me, it was like reverse engineering my dad's life. Where did he come from? Reverse engineer my mom, you know what I mean? Because then when you reverse engineer it and you see it from their lens, again, it goes to the idea of like, oh, they're just doing their best too.
Dude, it's so accurate. I mean, it's like understanding their perspectives. And I think we're oftentimes very critical of our parents and not understanding that, hey, like they didn't have any ill intentions.
Yeah.
They love you. Yeah. They tried to make the best decision with the information that they had, not knowing how it was going to come out. And maybe they took a risk or maybe it didn't play out the way that they wanted either. They didn't want to hurt you. And for me, you talked about the reverse engineering. Like one of the things for me that was really important, and I call them major turning points. And I identified the major turning points in my life. And I identified when I went into what I like to call emotional survival mode.
Yeah.
And that's when walls went up unconsciously, where when I felt this way, I had to react this way.
Yeah.
When I felt this way, I was going to push you away. When I felt this way, I was going to just completely clam up. When I felt this way, I was going to react, and when I was able to identify those turning points and then talk to myself about it or talk to a therapist about it or talk to someone who, actually a lot of the times it was my sister because she was in those moments with me a lot of the times. And, and I was like, why did I react that way? And asking myself that why, what made me feel like I could no longer just respond in a manner that wasn't detrimental to myself, and I think once, and it took, I'm 3 years sober. Like that's really started then. I'm still working on that where these events, caused me to react this way. And I still have to correct myself where it's like, no, that's a direct result of something that happened way on. A lot of those things were related to grief, and I think grief can make you act a certain way and can establish unhealthy habits if you don't face them. Yeah. So, I want to talk a little bit about that also, because I'm sure that comes up in your groups.
For sure.
Walk me through maybe a conversation that is taking place in your groups where grief was addressed.
Yeah. I can think of one specifically that came up. We were doing a check-in with the feelings, and one guy said sad, and then he just brushed over it, and we went around the room, and I went back to say, hey, why'd you say sad? And he dove into what he was going through, and it had to do with the loss of a family member. And that opened up for everybody else. And grief is really, it's hard. Luckily, I've lost grandparents, I still have both my parents, thank God. But, there does come a time where it's going to happen. Yeah. Right. That goes back to last month's arc, right? Memento Mori is you are going to die. That is a fact. That is reality. My daughter once asked me, Dad, are you afraid to die? And I said, you want the real answer or you want the dad answer? So I want the real answer. I said, no. And she was baffled. She's like, wait, what do you mean? I said, I don't want to die. But the reality is that it's going to happen. So, and I do believe that you die the way you lived, right? If you live in fear and you live in anxiety and you live in pain, you're going to go that way. But if you could live a more flow-based life, if you could live a life of authenticity, if you could live a life of, just being on the pursuit of overall health and wellness, well-being, giving to others, then you will go in a way that's graceful, right? And it's not fun to think about. It's definitely not, but it's a reminder, and the more we remind ourselves that, you're going to die and that's the reality, then it gives you an opportunity to actually step into a space of living.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think the way that people for me, I was traumatized by grief at multiple points in my life, and it really imposed the way that I handled anything big, it's like the anger, depression, denial, bargaining, and acceptance, the 5 stages of grief. Yeah. And now it's like kind of when I am faced with some adversity, I kind of go back to those 5 stages. It's like, why am I not accepting this?
Yeah.
All right, I'm angry or I'm depressed. Oh, I'm bargaining, which means I'm imposing my own will or wanting to change it when it's an absolute, and when I can identify which phase I'm really using to lead in responding to a situation, it helps me to be like, okay, like I just gotta accept.
Yeah.
What's the path to the least resistance for me to get to acceptance? Yeah. And when I impose that mindset with even the micro decisions or a macro decision, or it's helped me to remain calm and going back to the communication, I think that's something that a lot of people kind of struggle with, where I don't let anything get too big.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, how big is it in the whole scheme of things? Like, am I going to be upset about this tomorrow?
Right.
Am I going to be upset about this next week? Am I going to be upset about this next month? Like, it doesn't really matter in the whole, in the big picture, Right. But then it's also like what you said, where it's like, hey, like, understand their perspective and where they're coming from and why it's making them feel this way and why they're getting annoyed that I'm so accepting of this situation.
Yeah.
Because sometimes my approach to just like take things as they come isn't met with a lot of acceptance, I'll tell you.
Well, usually it's from people who are the exact opposite of that,
Yes.
right? Like it's never met by someone who's in the same mindset. So, and it's understandably so, because it's like, you if you're, not to say you don't care, but if you have a laissez-faire approach to things and you roll with the punches to the best of your ability, and you have someone who's trying to white knuckle their way through life and I gotta do this, you could. I remember actually, I used to work with a guy, and he said in one of the meetings, actually came to one of the meetings, he goes, "Man, you were so calm and you used to piss me off so much.
Man.
Like you being calm would make me so mad because I was so angry and nothing fazed you." And actually at the same job, someone came to me and said, "You're so simple, not simple-minded, but like simple." And I was like, it's taken a lot of complexity to become this simple, because you have to go through all that shit. You have to dig in the dirt and go through it all. And, again, it's easier said than done when I say like, oh, well, you're going to, when you lose a parent, you lose a child, like those are the thought of that's giving me chills right now. It's like, I can't even express the thought of that without even feeling like that's gotta be beyond, I can't even wrap my brain around it. But at the same time, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. We have this idea that we control things, that we have this Google Street View, and from the lens of God, it's not that. And there has to be this accepting of what it is.
Yeah. I mean, what they say in recovery is taking life on life's terms.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I think that goes to, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
You got to train yourself. And, we actually led the conversation by how like incorporating these habits and how the bend don't break and you're going to be tested. What are some daily practices that you immerse yourself where you take care of the maintenance component?
What a loaded question that is, because it's changed so much over time, right? And if you look at the social media, going back to comparison is the thief of joy. If you look at social media, so much of it is like, I got to wake up at 4, I got to do a cold plunge, I got to do a sauna, I got to get a run in, I got to lift this, I got to do this, I got to journal at this time. Mine has changed over time. I'm doing my best to give myself a little bit of that, not too much of it, but a little bit of that grace. Bending. Yeah, exactly. A little bit of the grace. At certain points, I was up at 4. I was up at 3:30 this morning, ran a little bit. I do my best to just find the opportunities when they present themselves. I think journaling is a great practice. I know there's formal structures to journaling, having actual journaling cues, which is great. I find journaling to be, a notepad or, a journal and a pen by my side pretty much at all times. And whenever I get these waves of excitement, depression, anxiety, joy, whatever it is, I just jot them down, just dump it out of my mind. Because if I don't, I know they'll spiral. They'll just keep on going. I've also had journal practices where I've sat down for 20 minutes and journaled everything out. So I don't think it's a one size fits all, but having modalities and being able to tap into them, cold plunges are fantastic. Like, on a physiological level, on a psychological level, right? You get out of that thing and you're ready to go. But there is this forced meditation of, wow, it's fucking cold in here, or I need to zero out my mind, right? Sensory deprivation, any type of physical endeavor, whether it be running, lifting. For me, it's Brazilian jiu-jitsu. That's just what I enjoy the most. But I think moving your body, diving into your mind and having an outlet for all of that stuff, and having community also. But holding yourself accountable to those in some way, shape, or form.
Dude, I love that. And it's so funny because, it's allowed you to build this community with the Council of Dudes and the Council of Dudes podcast. And now it's allowed you to provide that space with Agora. I want to talk about the birth of Agora.
Sure.
How did it start? It's a unique space where people hear social club and they think that it's a bunch of, alphas running around getting messed up and partying. And like, when you first built out the concept, what was it like?
Yeah. So it was, it was just that I realized that guys need that space. I wasn't sure, throughout the course of Agora, I've come to create basically 5 mantras. And that's what really led me to Agora. The first one was from the movie Step Brothers, don't lose your dinosaur. And leaning into these things that you used to enjoy as a kid, right? Leaning into doing things that pique your curiosity, right? At one point I bought a ukulele because I thought maybe I like to play the ukulele. I don't like to play the ukulele, but I thought it. And Agora was a thing that kind of planted seed in me. And one day I was in the shower actually, and I was like, oh, this is your idea. And then I stopped myself. I was like, oh no, this isn't your idea. This is God's idea. Like, and I jokingly said, this is my Noah's Ark. Like, this is my gift, through me, I'm creating this thing. And it just came to me the way it looks. I mean, if I showed you pictures of what I saw and what it is, it's right there, The second one was magic is real. And the idea that, out of that creativity space of not losing your dinosaur, things come up, right? Like we talked about earlier, like the serendipities become real. All of a sudden things start to align in a different way. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this is like, it's almost weird. Like, this is like, it's like, what the fuck is going on here? Like which led to the third one, which is follow the golden thread, which I think is for me, the biggest one. At one of the men's groups, the Council of Dudes, I remember feeling this yellow yarn almost going through the space. And I went home, I told my wife, I was like, I feel so fulfilled. Like, I feel like I just had Thanksgiving dinner. I was like, I don't know what that is, but that's what I'm following. And wherever it takes me, that's what I'm going for. And it led me to creating this space, creating Agora. And the last one is, if you build it, they will come. And the idea that if you put in the work, whatever that means to you, it will be received. It will be received. And then the final one is just letting go and letting things just play out as they're supposed to.
Do you think you've alluded a lot to like inner child and how that was a way for you to channel your imagination?
Sure.
Do you think that a lot of folks, as we grow up, we separate ourselves so much from who we were naturally in our simplicity that the baseline is really to get closer to that so that we could really be our true selves?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. It is the hero's journey. It is the alchemist, right? We start off as these essence of light and being and existence, and we go on this journey of the world. And the goal is to get back to that in some way, shape, or form. And so much of that is play and being curious and seeking the novelty that the world gives you and being present, right? Kids are super present. They fall, they hit their head, and they're on to the next thing, or they are so radically present. And tapping back into that, is so important as adults. What's the old expression? It's you don't grow old because you don't stop playing because you grow old. You grow old because you stop playing. Mm-hmm. And that's the truth. Like, the more we could play in the world and have friends and create friendships and seek these things, it just seems to me, from my experience, it's just a healthier, happier way of living life. And that's how I want to show up in the world. I want to live a harmonious life, not balance, because balance is misconstrued a lot, but just living a life that's harmonious and flow-based.
Dude, I love that. I want to ask you a rapid fire question.
Sure.
I used to have 5, and like everyone would spend an hour on the 5. Right. So I have 1, and it's a really big one. What advice would you give to someone who's on that journey to find their purpose?
Oh, just keep on going. Just keep on going. Like, tap into that feeling that pulls you beyond yourself. And that's going to show up in so many different ways. There's going to be so much noise around that, internal noise, external noise, but that path forward, that feeling, and it stands out. It's different. You can't put words to it. I call it that, right? It's the golden thread now, but it was that for a long time. Just keep on following it. Just don't let anything get in the way of that, no matter what it is, and it will pay dividends.
I love that. Vinny, this has been an awesome conversation.
Dude, thank you so much. It's tremendous.
This is like so long in the making, bro.
Yes, it is.
And
I gotta get you down to Agora to hop on the Council of Dudes.
We over-delivered, and I'm really, 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 really grateful for you to be here.
I appreciate it.
I look forward to immersing myself now in the Council of Dudes and visiting you at Agora. And I'd love for you to tell my audience how they can get involved with what you're doing in your community. and any other information that you want to share with
First off, thank you for having me. Long overdue. And I look forward to you coming down and hopping on the podcast as well. So thank you.
Yeah.
You can check out Agora at Agora_Westchester or head over to agorasocialclub.com. The Council Dudes podcast on all podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Rumble, YouTube, and over on Instagram at Vinny Brusco, VINNY_BRUSCO. Also, that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Vinny. Thank you to everyone who's listening. And I really do encourage you to just really immerse yourself in this episode. Please leave a review on what you took out of it. And I encourage you to subscribe and like, and definitely follow Vinny, the Council of Dudes podcast as well. And we will speak to you next time. God bless.